Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So today I'm going to give my review for the new Oppenheimer movie that just released recently. So like usual, I am going to go over a few parts of the movie, including a couple key moments within the film. So of course this is going to be pretty spoiler heavy, so just a heads up if you haven't seen the film yet. So the film follows the life story of American theoretical physicist and polymath J. Robert Oppenheimer. The plot focuses on his early life and studies, his involvement in the Manhattan Project during World War II, and his eventual fall from grace during his security hearing in 1954. In typical Nolan fashion, the plot jumps around in non-chronological order a little bit throughout the movie. We're treated to several scenes shot in full color as well as some in black and white. And Nolan has apparently stated in interviews this was his intention to convey the story from both subjective and objective perspectives. So the scenes in color are meant to represent the story from Oppenheimer's point of view, while the scenes in black and white are meant to be from a different character's point of view. And I think the scenes in black and white are supposed to be more historically accurate. At least that's my understanding. The movie has an extremely large cast, which I'll kind of talk about here in a little bit. And it also has a very large runtime, which I'll also talk about here in a little bit. So it's filled to the brim with details. It is a very impressive biopic. And apparently this is a movie that Christopher Nolan has wanted to make for over 20 years now. And it definitely shows, I think. It offers an interesting perspective into the life of the father of the atomic bomb, and I think it operates as a grim cautionary tale. So, before I kind of go into my general thoughts on the movie, overall, yes, I really liked this movie. It is, I think, one of the better biopics that I've seen in recent memory, and I'll kind of go over into some of my reasons why. I don't know if it's a movie that I'll ever watch again, just because it is a lot to take in. Not just because the subject matter is heavy, but also because there's a lot to this movie. But like I said, I'll kind of get into that a little bit. But first, I just want to talk about the acting. And all around, the acting in this movie is really good. I said before that there's a large cast of characters in this movie. There's it was almost getting kind of distracting watching this movie, like just the number of actors and actresses that I found myself recognizing in here. I'm not going to go into like every single cameo that I saw, but there were like a lot of people in this movie that I was not expecting to see it. Like you've got the main cast, Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, and Florence Pugh. But there's also like Gary Oldman shows up. He's in a very brief moment where he plays President Harry Truman. You got the guy Aaron Eldenreich, the guy who played Han Solo. Like the younger version of Han Solo, he's in here. You got Scott Grimes. There's a lot of actors and actresses that make appearances in this movie. Like Rami Malek's in it, Casey Affleck, like people that I had no idea were going to be in this film, just because they weren't in the trailer, at least not to my knowledge. So if you go into to the IMDb page, it's crazy, like just the number of people that were involved in this movie. But I'll talk about the acting first and foremost. Like I said, the acting is fantastic, especially from like the main cast. I'll kind of talk about them. So first off, we have Cillian Murphy as the title character Oppenheimer. And I definitely can understand why he was picked for the movie, especially just purely from a visual perspective. He looks a lot like Oppenheimer. So supposedly Murphy lost an undisclosed amount of weight for the role to kind of give him that emaciated look that Oppenheimer had. And man, if you look at the pictures of the two people side by side, they definitely look very similar. Like Murphy looks like he could be Oppenheimer's like brother or even like his cousin or something. I think Murphy has definitely come a long way since his days in movies like 28 Days Later. I've always liked him. I've always thought he's a great actor. I liked him as Scarecrow in the Batman film. So he's worked with Nolan before. So I think the two of them seem to have a pretty good rapport with one another. And I think in this one, Nolan gives him quite a bit to work with. There's like this subtle nuance to his performance in the movie that I think really gives his character a lot of depth. And I think like Murphy always has like this haunted look on his face. It's like his piercing eyes. Like he always has like this look on his face, like of just like horror. And I think in this movie, I think it's especially appropriate. As the as the father of the atomic bomb, I think having that haunted look in his eyes, I think really helps sell the point later on in the film, like where you see him, like after he's accomplished his work working on the bomb and the Manhattan Project. I think Killian does a really good job of capturing the look and feel of a man who, you can tell, like Oppenheimer, like he wanted to do what he thought was right for his country, because obviously at the time they were trying to beat the Nazis to get to the atomic bomb. So obviously it was, it was life and death work that he was trying to do. But you can also see like the sense of like the gravity of the situation that falls on him once he realizes what he's done. I think this movie was based off of it was based off of a biography called American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. And there's a quote in the beginning of the movie where they mention Prometheus, about how he was the god who gave fire to the humans and the other gods punished him, which is definitely like an appropriate comparison for Oppenheimer in this movie. And it's something they kind of allude to throughout the runtime, like how he feels like he's given humanity this all-powerful weapon, and he feels awful about it in some ways. Like I think Murphy does a good job of balancing that act of like showing the sense of accomplishment Oppenheimer feels for the weapon that he's created, but also that sense of horror and foreboding, like knowing that what he's done, can't be undone. So I definitely think he was a great pick for the title role. Emily Blunt, she's great in pretty much everything. Devil Wears Prada, Live, Die, Repeat. I think that's what it was called. Well, I know the movie, the Tom Cruise movie. I know the actual movie has a different name, but I think that's the name of the book that it was based on. But I think she's great in there. Everything she's in, she's fantastic, and I especially love her in A Quiet Place and those films. And in this movie, even though she doesn't have anywhere near as much screen time as Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr., I do think she does a good job with what she's given here. Like she plays Catherine Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer's wife, and she shows this extreme devotion to her husband in the movie during his work on the atomic bomb. But she also does a good job of showing the strain that it has on their relationship. And that's something that I think is interesting in this movie, is we see there's a lot of moments where it's very clear that Oppenheimer is not a family man. Like he and Catherine have a child together, but then like they give it to a couple of their friends to take care of their son while he kind of goes off and does work. So it's like, it really shows the clear strain between these two characters in the movie. And it's funny, like me and my buddy, we were watching this and we kind of agreed, like her character, there were definitely some scenes where she kind of made us nervous. Like there's a scene in the film like where Oppenheimer comes home and Catherine's at home with the baby, but she's like clearly just drunk out of her mind. And she just like she kind of snaps at him and just walks off. And we're just kind of sitting there like, oh shit, like, is this good? I think Emily Blunt does a really good job of showing that intensity in the movie. And honestly, I think she stands out in this movie as one of the better performances. There's one scene in particular that really stuck out to me, and it's when she defends her husband during his security hearing later on in the film. Like, a lot of information is divulged to her character, including a lot more intimate details of his relationship with another character named Jean Tatlock, who's played by Florence Pugh. But we still see, like, Emily Blunt's character, she acknowledges this and she still defends her husband in this moment. And I think that was a great moment for her character. And there's other moments throughout the film where we really see her I think she kind of helps ground Oppenheimer a little bit, kind of reminding us that he wasn't just a mathematician and researcher, but that he was just like a guy just trying to do his job. He was a human being. He had flaws like all the rest of us. And despite being a genius mathematician, like, he was a guy that, maybe he wasn't the best family man. So I think Blunt does a really good job of bringing that to life in the movie. The other performance I really want to focus on is Robert Downey Jr. as Louis Strauss. And in my opinion, Downey Jr. I think he gives the absolute best performance of the film for his portrayal of Strauss. So I guess apparently Louis Strauss, he was one of the original members of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. So he played a pivotal role in assisting Oppenheimer with the Manhattan Project back in World War II. And there's kind of a secondary plot in the film that takes place where it's revealed that Strauss harbored great disdain towards Oppenheimer. I guess he believed that Oppenheimer had a conversation with Albert Einstein that turned Einstein against him, which we do see that Albert Einstein's character does show up in the movie. There's actually a few moments where we see Einstein and Oppenheimer have like conversations, including one pretty important one-on-one conversation that they have with each other when they're first introduced to each other in the film. And when Strauss comes up to talk to Oppenheimer later, we see Einstein kind of walks past him looking kind of pissed off at him, almost. And this creates kind of a rift between Oppenheimer and Strauss throughout the rest of the film, where Strauss thinks that that Oppenheimer's kind of been plotting against him. As well as there's other moments where it looks like Oppenheimer kind of makes comments about Strauss's concerns on nuclear energy, and I guess Strauss takes that very personally. But I think Downey Jr. really manages to display that animosity effortlessly. I wasn't particularly a huge fan of the security hearing portion of the film, and I'll kind of go into that here in a little bit. But I did appreciate that it allowed the audience to really get a sense of how much Strauss hated Oppenheimer. There's a great scene where Strauss is discussing with his Senate aide, played by Alden Ehrenreich. I think I said his name backwards before. Alden Ehrenreich. If I said that wrong before, sorry about that. But in this meeting, we see the complete and utter hatred and disrespect that Strauss holds for Oppenheimer. And he's willing to go so far as to ruin his reputation. Like, he basically puts together that security hearing, and he basically kind of uses his political influence to, like, shift it in his favor and, like, basically make it a losing game, like an uphill battle for Oppenheimer, to where he can't win, essentially. And personally, I think Downey Jr. deserves at least a nomination for his portrayal of Strauss in this film. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a nomination next year during Oscar season. Another big one is Florence Pugh as Jean Tadlock. So she plays kind of another, like, I guess, smaller romantic interest for Oppenheimer in the film. Just as a side note, man, Florence Pugh is in, like, everything right now. Like, I saw her in the trailer for the new Dune movie. So she's in that. She was in Midsummer, I believe. Don't Worry, My Darling. And I think also, like, what was it? Black Widow. She was in that movie as well. Like, man, she is just in everything right now. And she is given a somewhat smaller role in this movie. I think altogether she may be only in like 15 minutes of the film, which in a 3-minute runtime, that's not much time. But that being said, despite her short appearance in the film, I think she does leave a lasting impression as Tadlock. Her romantic relationship with Oppenheimer does play a pretty major role in the film. We see them kind of hook up more in the beginning of the film. It's interesting from both a character perspective and how it affects Oppenheimer, and also how her later suicide actually impacts him emotionally. Another big impact her character has on the story is her connections to the Communist Party. Apparently, Tadlock was a member of the Communist Party back then and even wrote for a publication for them. And her relationship with Oppenheimer actually apparently played a big part in his security hearing at the time. Because of her connections with the Communist Party, apparently there were a lot of people, and this was mainly from Strauss's influence, that thought that Oppenheimer may have had connections with the Communist Party as well. Even though he really didn't. Or at least, well, maybe he did, but not to the extent that they believed. Now, I don't know how true to reality the film was with their relationship, but I will say this is probably one of my criticisms of the film, and it's kind of a smaller one, is I do wish we could have seen a little bit more fleshed out between these two. And again, I'm judging this movie based more from an entertainment movie perspective. I'm not a historian, so I'm not in a position to judge this movie based on its historical accuracy, so I'm not going to do that. But we were only really given a handful of scenes between these two characters, and while I do think they work, and yes, the focus is more on the atomic bomb, the construction of the bomb itself, it just, I don't know, for a big actress like Florence Pugh, it just seemed kind of odd that she was limited to such a small part in the movie. But like I said, I think overall her performance works. She does leave an impression on the film, and when she does, like in her suicide scene in the movie, does hit pretty hard. So I think she's used pretty effectively. The last actor I want to just mention is Matt Damon as General Leslie Groves. So Matt Damon, one of my favorite actors, love him, Good Will Hunting, fantastic actor. I think he definitely offers up some of the more lighthearted portions of the film. You've probably seen the trailer where he and Oppenheimer talk about the chances of total world destruction being near zero. There's a scene in the movie like where they're discussing, like when they're right before they test the atomic bomb, they talk about how it could, apparently when they were doing it, there was a chance that it could potentially just keep expanding and burn the atmosphere and basically destroy the whole fucking planet, which is terrifying. Just the idea that that conversation probably took place, that there was just, even though like Oppenheimer says the chances are near zero, just the idea that it's like, oh yeah, there's also a chance that this weapon could literally kill everybody on the planet. That whole conversation, despite being very dark and heavy in the story, the way they handle it is actually kind of funny. I do think Matt Damon does a really good job of balancing a man trying desperately to beat the Nazis to obtaining the first nuclear weapon, and he also adds a bit of levity to the plot too at the same time. His scenes between him and Cillian Murphy were definitely some of the highlights of this film, at least in my opinion. One in particular that I liked was when he actually defends Oppenheimer during his security hearing. Granted, it's kind of an offhanded defense of him, but he does say that, like, when they ask him, like, would you hire him again or something like that, and he says, yes, I would. I think it definitely shows that he trusts Oppenheimer, and we see him and Oppenheimer working together to get the Manhattan Project up and running, like when they start building the facility out in New Mexico, because I think it's revealed that Oppenheimer's brother has like land out there or something, and that's where that testing facility took place. And just kind of seeing these two work off of each other, seeing them play off each other, I think Murphy and Damon do a really good job together in this movie. And like I said, Matt Damon, I'm always a fan of him. I love seeing him in films, so I think he does a great job in this movie. One thing I wanted to note though was that I don't know if it was makeup or if he just put on weight for this film, but like they definitely made him look like older and heavier in this movie. It could have very well just been makeup. I'm not 100% sure, but I saw interviews with him like behind the scenes and stuff, and he looked very different. He looked much younger, so could have been CGI. I'm not really sure. I mean, they made Robert Downey Jr. look a lot older too in this. Like he had kind of like a wig on and stuff, like a hairpiece, and they made him look quite a bit older as well. So I guess it's not that unbelievable. Overall, the acting in the movie, that's very good. I just kind of want to name those actors in general. I think they do a great job. Another standout that I liked was I liked Casey Affleck with his character when his character, I think, is investigating Oppenheimer in the movie during his security hearing, and there's a tense little scene between him and Oppenheimer when he's talking to him later on, and I don't know, I think Casey Affleck just does a really good job of having that kind of quiet intensity to him, very much like kind of how Cillian Murphy has in this movie. I think everybody who's involved in this movie, they all do a great job. I liked Gary Oldman as Harry Truman. We get to see, I don't know if this was something that really took place. Apparently it was. I guess it's kind of an infamous moment where Truman calls Oppenheimer a crybaby, because there's a scene later where we see Oppenheimer telling him that he kind of feels ashamed of what he's done, that he feels like he has blood on his hands, and Truman calls him a crybaby. And they did a good job of making Gary Oldman look like Harry S. Truman, like with the makeup on. I almost didn't recognize him until I saw like his face. It's like his eyes or something. There's something about Oldman's face that I immediately recognize that it's him. Even when I watch him in old movies like the Fifth Element or Leon the Professional, it's like I always recognize him, and also his voice too. He's got a very recognizable voice. So another thing that I want to talk about just a little bit is the sound design of the movie. The sound design really impressed me here. Just a heads up, if you do see this in theaters or if you've got a powerful surround sound system at home, this movie has a lot of loud moments. It's pretty appropriate given the subject matter, but yeah, there are several scenes where we see Oppenheimer just haunted by the atomic bomb, as he seems to almost be distracted by the sound of explosions. Like, this occurs a lot throughout the movie, and especially during his security hearing. Like, we see him, like, when he's trying to focus on what's going on, and he can just, like, he almost, like, hears the sound of an explosion going off in the background, and just like with the surround sound in the theater that I was in, the movie gets really loud at several moments. It almost gives the impression that the bomb is overshadowing everything else going on in his life, which I think definitely makes sense. I mean, if you just created the most powerful weapon in human history, yeah, that's definitely going to weigh on you for sure. I also like, there's a scene later in the movie, like when they actually do run the first successful test of the atomic bomb. And when they detonate it, there's a decent amount of time before the sound wave actually hits the test crew. Like, you see the explosion, but you don't actually hear it for a little bit because it's a bit of a delay because they're so far away from it. But man, when that sound wave finally does hit, the theater I was in just felt like the whole damn theater was shaking. Like, I'm not going to lie, it almost made me jump when it happened. So again, like I said, just be prepared. This is an extremely loud movie. If you've got sensitive hearing, maybe just bring in a couple of earplugs. Another thing I just wanted to focus on is just kind of the anti-war aspect of the film. In my opinion, Oppenheimer works very well as an anti-war film. There's several times throughout the runtime where Oppenheimer is greatly concerned about his part in creating the atomic bomb. There's a few scenes that really stuck out to me. One is which, after they test the bomb and it's successful, they give it to the U.S. military, who are very businesslike, which I thought was almost kind of comical in a sense, like in a messed up kind of way. But one scene that really stuck out to me was when Oppenheimer is giving it's kind of sort of like an acceptance speech to kind of pat himself and the other scientists on the back. And during that scene, like, it's very clear that, like, he is so, I don't think the gravity of the situation has really settled on him just yet. Like, everybody's cheering, they're applauding. And again, like I mentioned before, he can't even hear them because all he hears is just that sound of the bomb going off. And the imagery in this scene I thought was very effective, because he actually starts to see the people in the audience, like he's imagining what would happen to them if the bomb was hitting them. And you see like the flashes of light, and there's even moments where you see like people's faces like peeling off. It's like really disturbing to watch. And then at one point he looks down and his feet are standing in the corpse, like a charred corpse of a victim of a nuclear bomb. So we see like already he's being haunted by what he's done, knowing that this bomb is going to be used to ruin so many lives, like just countless lives. And it's obvious in this scene that he is completely haunted by it. And even as he speaks to the crowd, we never hear their cheers because he doesn't hear them. All he hears is just the sound of that bomb. That's the only thing that's on his mind now. Like, in many ways, the bomb has become his life. It's consumed him. And I love that scene. To me, that was such a great moment. Another great moment in the movie is when Oppenheimer and several other characters, I think it's mostly the scientists, they're shown footage of the after effects of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, we see Oppenheimer see the photos of it, but we don't see it. And that's what I like about this scene. The movie never explicitly shows us any violence. Like, that's one thing about this movie that really, I think, impressed me, is that it gives the implication of violence on a great scale, but we never see it. Like, we never see, I don't think we ever see a single gun being fired. We never see any blood at all. We don't see the aftermath of when the bomb is created. We only see it from the perspective of the people who worked on it, the scientists, the engineers, the architects, the chemists, the mathematicians. We only see it from their perspective. We never see what happens. Even when they talk about, like, when the bomb is actually officially dropped in Japan, Oppenheimer and the rest of them, they hear about it over like the intercom and the radio, but they don't see it. But we see the horror on their faces, the look of just sheer disgust when they see just what they've done and how it's been used against other human beings. And that, I think, really works to the film's effect. It's a great anti-war message without beating you over the head with it. In many ways, this movie kind of reminded me of an old anime I watched a long time ago called Barefoot Gen, I think is how you pronounce the name, which is basically, it's an anime movie about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's from the perspective of a Japanese boy and his family living there during the events of that, and you see in pretty gruesome detail, like, just the effects that it had on them. If you haven't seen that anime, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's brutal. It's very heavy subject matter, but I definitely think it's worth checking out for historical preservation. I think it's definitely an important film to check out. Like, this movie reminded me a lot of that, and also Grave of the Fireflies. I kept getting impressions of those two anime films. But yeah, I personally really like it when a movie can deliver a strong anti-war message without necessarily being over the top and using gratuitous violence. Not that I'm saying that there's no place for that, but I appreciate it almost more when a movie is able to effectively deliver that message, that punch, without necessarily trying to gross you out or horrify you with imagery. This movie, I think, allows your imagination to run wild and to try to imagine like what the people in Japan went through when this bomb was created. Because throughout the entire movie, you hear Oppenheimer and the other scientists discuss like the work that goes into it, the power of the explosion, and just like what it does to the body. And hearing them talk about it, I think almost makes it that much scarier, because you keep imagining like what would it be like to live through this? Like, even if you survive the initial blast, just the radiation afterwards would be just god awful. So yeah, I think those scenes work very well. And also too, I think something else that kind of occurred to me watching this movie is that Oppenheimer and the other scientists, they know better than anybody how strong this bomb is. They knew what the atomic bomb could do better than anyone, like better than probably anybody else in the US government. So they, of all people, when they see those images, you know that they see those and they probably know better than anybody, like just what the people of Japan were going through when that bomb was going off. So I think that definitely speaks volumes to the horror of that bombing. So yeah, like those, I think those scenes are great. There's another scene later where I kind of mentioned this before, where Oppenheimer talks to President Truman, and Truman calls him a crybaby because he tells him that he feels like he has blood on his hands after the bombings and stuff. And Truman delivers him this really powerful line, and he says, "They're not going to remember you. They're not going to remember that it was Oppenheimer who dropped the bomb, or Oppenheimer didn't drop the bomb. I did. They're going to remember me for doing this." Which I had never heard that before, but that's a very interesting perspective. It's like, yeah, people back then probably remembered President Truman was the one who gave the order for it. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective the movie gives in that sense. So yeah, I thought that was a really powerful moment within the movie. And then also something else I do want to mention, I'm gonna talk about the final scene of the movie here. So just major spoiler if you haven't seen the movie. So I mentioned before how Strauss, played by Downey Jr., throughout the movie he hates Oppenheimer because he thinks that he made a comment to Albert Einstein that made Einstein hate Strauss. The final scene of the movie, we actually do get to see what it was that Oppenheimer said to Einstein. And in the final scene, it's the very final scene of the movie, and I think it's perhaps one of the most powerful moments in the movie. We find out that he actually did not, in fact, badmouth Strauss to Einstein. All he did was just express his concerns on nuclear weapons. We see him say to Einstein, that he believes that he has started a chain reaction that will destroy the world. And that's basically where the movie leaves off. And it ends on that very grim, open-ended note. Because, we've seen that nuclear weapons have only become more powerful since then. So in many ways, Oppenheimer wasn't wrong. But I think that was a very powerful ending to the movie. I think as far as criticisms go for the movie itself, I have maybe a couple. My biggest issue, I think, with the movie is definitely the runtime. The movie is just over 3 hours long. I looked up how long it was before, but I can't remember what the exact length is. But it's just over 3 hours long. I think it's like 3 hours and 10 minutes or something like that. It's a long movie. I enjoyed it. I really liked it. And I think overall it does flow very well, at least as well as a 3 hour long biopic can. But I think this is definitely going to be an issue for some people, especially with the shift in the plot during the second half of the movie, the second half to last third of the movie, when they start to focus more on the security hearing. I really think that the security hearing portion is probably going to be where the film loses a lot of viewers. I mean, I personally found myself kind of checking out during that part. It's not that the hearing wasn't interesting. I actually really enjoy courtroom dramas. It's just that after watching these characters go through the monumental task of creating the bomb, this kind of felt like a bit much. I remember kind of thinking, like, when I was talking to my buddy about this after we watched it, like, the first probably hour and a half, 2 hours of the movie are really just them developing the bomb. And then after that, then it kind of bounces back and forth in time between the present day and, like, the security hearing for Oppenheimer. And when that part started, I kind of kept thinking, like, when the bomb testing was over, I thought, oh, okay, that's the movie, it's over. But then it goes to the hearing, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then it kind of feels like it sort of goes into a different movie, sort of, where now we kind of see Oppenheimer kind of, he's kind of regretting the work that he did on the bomb, or at least that seems to be the implication. And I think there's moments where there's scenes where it shows that he's trying to introduce measures to regulate nuclear weapons or nuclear testing in the United States, like research. That's actually what he goes to Truman for, because he wants to try to essentially stop them from furthering research and development on nuclear weapons. And so the movie kind of takes a bit of a tonal shift in that regard. So I do wonder if people aren't going to be a little bit checked out during that part of the movie. Like I said, the later half to last third of the film. Like, the security hearing is definitely interesting, and I think it definitely conveys a lot of very interesting information about Oppenheimer. But I just can't help but wonder if people aren't going to be feeling a little bit fatigued at that point of the film. Especially after going through like 2 hours of watching them trying to build the bomb. I just can't help but wonder if people are going to be a little bit checked out like I was during this moment. Like, the security hearing, in my opinion, was probably the least interesting part of the movie. It's not that it was bad. I don't know. I wasn't as invested. I think this movie would have been a little bit better if they could have just trimmed out maybe like 30 minutes or even possibly an hour of the movie. Like, you could still have the security hearing in there, but maybe they could have just minimized that down to maybe just like 15 minutes or so. Maybe just make it sort of like, not an afterthought, but just give it like a much smaller presence within the film. To me, I think the focus really should have been on the development of the atomic bomb. I'm glad that Nolan wanted to put that much detail in the film. Like, I appreciate that for sure. I don't know if it stuck the landing that well. So yeah, I mean, that's really my only major criticism. Overall, I would definitely say Oppenheimer is arguably one of Nolan's best films. It's also, for better or worse, his most Nolan film. While I think this movie works great as both a biopic and anti-war film, I do think the length of the movie might be a problem for some people. There's a lot going on in this movie. I think I'll definitely have to watch it at least a few more times, but there's a lot of detail in this film. It's clear that Nolan had a lot of passion for this project, and it shows in every frame, in my opinion. There's no doubt in my mind that this will be considered by many as one of the best historical dramas ever made, and probably at least get a few nominations during Oscar season next year. I guess the only advice that I would give anybody about to watch this movie or check this out is to be prepared for a long viewing. If you're patient, I do think you're going to get a great film experience. Just maybe grab a few extra junior mints before you watch this one. Alright everyone, I think that's going to conclude this episode. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you like what you heard, and I will catch you all next time. Later.